It's Father's Day. We should be excited and celebrating this morning. Happy Father's Day to all the dads in the house this morning and the next generation of fathers. I want to say Happy Father's Day. It's a beautiful Sunday. It's a beautiful day. And the blessing of God is in his house this morning. I want to share with you this morning from the book of Nehemiah. We all, or most of all, are aware of the story of Nehemiah, a man who was in the company of a king. And when he heard the news about his homeland, became grieved and decided to go back and rebuild his homeland. This morning, I want to begin by asking you a question. If I was to say, what is one of the rapid growing issues confronting our society today, what will your answers be? Great. Fantastic. Anything else? Corruption. Excellent. Selfishness. Look at that. I mean, the list can go on. But what if I told you that fatherlessness is one of the greatest things impacting our society today? Will you agree? It is rapidly growing. Let me give you some statistics quickly. The American First Policy Institute, in their 2023 briefing, provided the following. Across America, in 2022, approximately 18.3 million of children who without a father in their home, comprising of 1 in 4 Americans. That is 1 in 4 Americans living without a father influence. Across America, about 80% of single-parent homes are led by single mothers. Children from single-parent families are twice likely to suffer from mental health, behavioral problems. In a study of 56 school shootings, only 10% of the shooters, 18%, were raised in a suitable home with both biological parents. In 2013, Bill Mulohemberg noted that fatherlessness is a growing problem in Australia and the Western world, what are caused by divorce and broken families or deliberate single parenting. More and more children grow up without fathers. Indeed, 85% of single-parent families are fatherless families. The sociologist David Poppenel said when he wrote about fatherlessness in 1996, the decline of fatherhood is one of the most basic, unexpected, and extraordinary social trends of our time. Wade Hahn, on Fathers and Welfare Rate from 1999, noted, there exists today no greater single threat to the long-term well-being of children, our communities, our nation, than the increasing number of children being raised without a committed father. David Blackenhorn stated in Fatherless America, fatherlessness is the most harmful demographic trend in this generation. Lastly, Burgess Owens, who's the representative for Utah, declared on Fox News on January 17, 2022, that America's crisis is a lack of fathers. Can you imagine that? You think that drug abuse, other things will be the key issue society are confronting today. But no, we are confronting the issue of fatherlessness. And if we are confronting that now, can you imagine what's going to happen to the next generations if this issue is not tackled now? This is why I want to speak to you this morning on the subject, the call for godly men to help rebuild the walls of fatherlessness. The call for godly men to help rebuild the cracking walls of fatherlessness. Can you imagine if Nehemiah wasn't doing anything about the situation back home? What do you think was going to happen to the wall of Jerusalem if Nehemiah decided to just sit back and do nothing? Can you think what's going to happen if Nehemiah just joined the vast majority of those that survive and say, you know what, we are distressed, we are troubled, we can't do anything? If he just joined the numbers and just watch. Nehemiah knew something was wrong. And the scripture said he was disturbed. He was so disturbed that he decided to do something. Church, we are at war. Our society is struggling. We need to join the rebuilding process. And I can tell you this morning, that is not going to happen with everything else that's happening. Godly men will need to rise up. And we start the rebuilding process by reclaiming our positions in society as godly men. You see, one of the most important things is we have abdicated our position. We relinquish our positions. And that is why we see some of these issues coming up. Godly men, we left our positions and the enemy created and presented alternatives. All the things you see creeping in the church today, the heresy, the ungodly things, those are all alternatives the enemy has provided. And we made it so easy and simple because we opened the door for these things to come in. Take a moment this morning and think about it. If we godly men would stand up like the old days men, do you think things were going to get so bad? What is your position in the church today, man? What is your position in the church today? It is a pity to say, because when you're listening to some godly men, you'll have a heart attack about Christianity. Seriously. When you're listening to some people talk, you will have a heart attack. Sometimes, even godly men, all they want to do is talk about conspiracy theories. They want to be the subject matter experts. Things are happening. Oh, this person was the cause. That person was the cause. This is going to happen. The government, this and that. Nehemiah wasn't concerned about conspiracy theories. When he heard the news, he was troubled. I want to ask you this morning, where are the days when men will fall face flat on the ground and seek the intervention of God? Where are the days when men would stand on the promises of God, the likes of King Jehoshaphat, Joshua, and Caleb? Where are those days when men will stand up and bring their family and the nation to God? We are living in difficult times. The walls of our society are cracking. God's order is being rebranded, or should I say, is on an attack. Millions of children are growing up without their fathers. And what do? We talk about the issues. We sit back and think about who did what, who didn't do what. Let me tell you, we are at war. And the reality is, we are only battling the foot soldiers. We are only fighting the foot soldiers. The horsemen are coming. If you think fatherlessness is the most serious issue right now, wait till the day that you get told you can't worship, you can't do this, you can't be called this person, you can't be called that person. Like the days of Daniel, you have to obey these laws or you get thrown into the lion's den. The days are coming where you and me, fathers, people will look at us and say, you know what? You can't defeat the rulers of this world. You've got to join them or be crushed. What will you do? If you are already relinquishing your positions because you are troubled with such a small issue, It is time for us to arise. It is time for us to look to the Creator to be able to address this issue. God is looking for men that He will look down upon to say, arise, you mighty men of valor. Can you imagine what is going to happen when God looks down and He sees His people, particularly His men, on their face, praying and seeking His intervention to the issue of fatherlessness? Can you imagine what's going to happen? What that's going to do to governments and everyone around? Church, when Nehemiah heard the news, he was distressed. He didn't care about particulars. He was troubled to respond, and he did something about it. Let's be like Nehemiah today. Let us be so troubled with this issue. Let us be so troubled with this issue that we are forced to do something. Rebuilding the walls of fatherlessness require godly men to stand in the gap. When you read chapter 1 of Nehemiah, you will see that as soon as the news broke, he went in a corner, started weeping. But soon enough, he got on his knees and started crying to God. He took God by his words. And he started praying for his people. You see, we are going to change society only by falling on our knees to seek God's intervention. First thing we see in verse 2 and 3 is that Nehemiah took upon himself to learn about what was happening in his hometown. Today, church, don't wait for somebody to come and tell you what's happening. Men, take their initiative. Know what's happening to that young fellow, who sits in a corner in church. Learn what's wrong with him. What is he struggling with? What does he need to assist him in becoming the best he can be in the kingdom? Disciple him. Mentor him. Don't wait until something happens. In verse 3 to 4, we see Nehemiah was distressed. He began to weep. Most men today, when we hear the news about the condition of our young people, the growing issue of fatherlessness, and yet, most of all, do nothing about this. When was the last time you stood in a gap for somebody without being asked? When you read verse 5 to 11, Nehemiah stood in the gap for his nation, for his people. Instead of talking about issues today, man, fathers, let us change our mindset. Let us look to God for the solution. But having said all of these things about men and etc., I'm glad I'm in this church. You want to know why? Are you sure you want to know why I'm glad to be in this church? Okay, I'll tell you. Find an issue. Bring it next week. Just find a problem. Pastor Paul is not here today, so I don't want you to bring it in today. But bring it in next week. And as soon as Pastor Paul is aware of it, he will turn around, look to Shady. Mate, what is this problem? I'm on it. Oh, Merchie, Steve, what can we do about this? Oh, hang on a second. I got some resources. Keith, when are we starting? Like, you would see men at work. I'm not just saying that because I want to say it. But call Pastor Shady anytime, and you will get a response. Speak to Pastor Paul about issues, and you will get a response. Imagine if our churches were full of men who are prepared to move to the next level. What do you think will happen? Rebuilding the walls of fatherlessness requires godly men who will trust and respond to God. We see in chapter 2, Nehemiah trusted God. And he trusted that God was going to work through him. So he responded. He knew God was going to work through him and the king he was serving. So because he was walking in God, because he trusted God, Nehemiah became so bold that he even spoke to his king about what was happening, what he intended to do. So bold that he even requested letters to be able to get permits and timber for the gates. Church, I declared and prophesied this morning that the boldness of God is going to fall upon you. That you will start to decree and declare. Young men in this church will be able to stand up in the face of difficult times and declare, "Thou sayest the Lord." Nehemiah was bold that he even appealed to the king for letters. Most men would rather let things happen because they don't want to upset certain things or certain people. You'll find a high percentage of men in many areas discussing the implications of fatherlessness. But only few are committed to actually having an impact. We need to change the damaging atmosphere of our society. Just like Joshua and Caleb, men who refused to allow what everyone was thinking. They stood up and said, if God says it, we will take it. And because of their action, people wanted to kill them. Their own people turned against them because they decided to trust God and stand on His word and promises. Man, when we are walking in the glory of God, we will become so bold that things around us will start to shift. To rebuild, we must change the atmosphere around us. The reality is, we also need to have a servant mentality as men. And sometimes that's the most difficult thing to do. Because when we look at Nehemiah, he wasn't just thinking about himself. He was thinking of serving God and God's people. And that is why when he went back to his hometown, everybody was happy to join him and build. Nehemiah had such an influence that even to an extent when there were pushbacks, those that were building the wall were interested and happy to rebuild with one arm and hold weapons in the other arm. You got to understand, when you shift the atmosphere, when you start to influence people, things change. And that is only going to happen when you have a servant mentality. When I talk about servant mentality, I can't really go further without referencing Dr. Grime. When we first arrived in this country, yes, I'm going to talk about you a little bit, Pastor Grime. When we first arrived in this country back in 2005-ish, we had lots of different pastors coming to see the family. Oh, we've got a church. Come and join us. We will do this. We do this in the church and everything. 6, 7 different pastors. We even have some of our Africans coming. The church here is like back home. You feel like you are back home. And I'm just watching. And then Dr. Grime shows up. What time did you African arrive? And I'm like, okay, who's he? And then he was talking to my mom. If you ever met my mom, you know that when it comes to men of God, there is a level of respect. So you will not even dare do something silly. So I'm looking at him. He's looking at mom. Who's he? Emmanuel. Oh, Emmanuel, God with us. Wonderful. And then he didn't talk church. The first question was, what do you guys need? How long? What are you looking at? What's the problem? My mom was like, we've been here for a few weeks. Our case manager isn't responding. Things, don't worry about it. I know this is temporary accommodation. You need a permanent accommodation. Sandra has it covered. Who's Sandra? Oh, she's the lady in the church. She knows about real estate. Something's going to happen sooner or later. A few days later, I rang my mom. Look, we've got a house. Come and take a look. And I'm like, this guy has got ulterior motives. Because where I come from, pastors don't bring themselves down that way. They held in high regards. And there is Pastor Grime. Oh, I got to fix this. I've got to fix that. And I'm like, what does he really want? Fast forward, his response to us made us interested into knowing where he was serving. And then when we got into this church, we never left. Because Pastor Grime responded to us differently. He wanted us to be in this church. I soon realized that he had no intention. He was just doing God's work. The same reason why thousands of people across the island will refer to him as Papa Grime. You see, when we exhibit that servant mentality, we can influence and change the atmosphere around us. I've got to speak truth. Just got to observe time. Rebuilding the wall will require men who are prepared to leave a legacy for the next generation of fathers. And before I go there, if I talk a little bit about legacy, can I say something first? To our mothers, our wives, and our sisters in the building. I know I'm making reference to the impact of fatherlessness this morning. And I know at times that can be misunderstood, especially our mothers who are raising, children on their own. But let me say something this morning. God has a way of intervening in those situations. Because I know there are millions of single moms today who have done a phenomenal job. I'm a prime example. I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for that. Because when my mom was bringing me, it was tough times. Oh, believe me. There were days that I just look around and I'm like, but why? Growing up in an environment, schooling with rebels ladies, living in an environment with rebel ladies, standing around with people who were, involved in scams and that. There were days that people came up to me and said, Manny, with your level of understanding and intelligence, you can become such a wealthy person at your age. Well, you know how to write. You know how to do this and do that. Can you imagine when you find yourself in a dire situation where nothing is working out for you and there are all these temptations coming your way? They come back, 1 or 2 months and they've got money, the luxury cars and everything you can think about. And everyone, even my teachers, wrote me off and said, you are in an environment where nobody even make it up to year 12. Everyone just ends up as criminals. You got to join the line, bribe, pay your way out in school because you are going nowhere. That was the kind of environment we were living in. But my mom, having been able to also discipline, was a prayer warrior. And even though I hated at the time, she worked for so many hours, 16, 17 hours daily. And then she will have 1 or 2 hours to sleep in. But she will go, when I walk past her room, she was on her knees. And those words stuck in my ear. Father, protect my son. Protect his mindset. Make him understand that he will praise you whether we have it and whether we don't have it. And so many times I ask myself, why is she so persistent and consistent? You have nothing. God hasn't done that much for us in that long. And one time she called on me, she said, look, you may think that way, but when I had it all, I was praising him. And now that I've got nothing, I'm going to praise him. And there will be a day that you will understand, that you will stand and praise him. There was only one thing that I took from her, and that was my worship. There's only one thing I took from her, that was crying on my knees when things got worse. or when things were good. And I praise God for that. Because that's something she left down to me. Fathers, as we find ourselves in such difficult moments, we need to understand that the next generation of fathers going to experience a lot of difficulties. So we need to try and leave something to them. I want to share a lot on the story of Joseph for a little bit, or generations of fathers that through forgiveness, they were able to build such a strong legacy. We know the story of Joseph. His brother sold him into slavery, and he went to prison. A lot happened. Now he was one of the big names in Egypt. And his father was ill, Jacob. And at this point in time, Joseph is looking at Jacob and it's like, I'm going there to see him. The truth was, at that point in time, Joseph did not need anything from Jacob. He could have just, come up and say, you know what am I going to do there? This was a guy who played favoritism. And because of that, I was sold into slavery. He didn't find me when I was struggling. I'm not a big person in Egypt. What should I go for him for? I don't need anything from him. But Joseph wanted his dad more than anything. Even though he didn't need him, he wanted him. Fathers, men, I know there are people you haven't spoken to in years. Some of you here today stop looking after some young people because they were walking in a different direction. You don't need those people. But how much do you want to see them safe? How much do you want to see them moving in a direction that God has called you to assist them in? Joseph laid a platform for his children. I can imagine him speaking to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. You know what? Pharaoh called me Zabanean, but that's not my real name. My name is Joseph. You are living in Egypt, but this is not your real home. You come from Hebron. I can imagine him looking at his two boys and saying, and guess what? You have a granddaddy who wrestled with God. He said to God, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. And I can imagine he didn't stop there. He said, you have a great-granddad who was placed on an altar by his father, about to be persecuted. And you know what? God did not allow that to happen. And I can imagine him finishing with, something like this. You come from a family of great believers. Don't underestimate who you are. Joseph made his children understand their heritage. He made them understand their identity. And because of that, his children were interested to see where their home was and who their grandfather was. And as they went there, they were blessed by Jacob. Fathers, where are you today in your relationship with your children and family? What are you discussing with your children today? I know some of you today may have been hurt. Some of you today may have been rejected. When you needed people, they weren't there for you. And you don't need them right now. But how much do you want to see God working in them? Joseph could have just sat back there in Egypt and did nothing. But he wasn't prepared to allow unforgiveness ruin his legacy that he was building to leave with his children. Fathers, men, let us not allow circumstances define our legacy. Let us not allow unforgiveness to ruin what we are building for the next generation. We see an excellent example in the book of 2 Timothy. When Paul was at the end of his life, being about to be taken away by the executioner, Paul wrote to Timothy. And he said these words, I have fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Back in chapter 3, Paul also wrote to Timothy, But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you've learned it and how from your childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. Timothy was a devout Christian who was well known to Paul and the people he commanded. But Paul provided this encouragement to Timothy at the end of his life. An encouragement that we all can sort of look to today. There's one thing I gather when I read parts of the book of Timothy. Paul did his best to leave a good legacy to Timothy. Fathers, let's do our best today to leave a good legacy for the next generation. I'm going to Pastor Graham again. When you look around, you see what he's done in this church, in Papua New Guinea. What a legacy that is blessed by God and also is a blessing to so many people. You speak to some of his grandkids, and they are excited every time they go into Papa Graham's house. I think the rector was married a few times on some of the occasion. And, you know, if you really want to get some context, speak to Matthew. Matthew will give you details. He will give you some, commentaries, and he will even give you some great opinions. Don't go to Josh. Don't go to Joe. Just speak to Matty. And, we're going to Papa Graham's, Granddad's house today. Yeah, what's happening there? It's Father's Day. It's a huge, lunch, and Grandpa's doing this. I'm excited. I've got this. I've got that. The excitement shows it's hard work. I believe that there were some times Pastor Graham would have had to challenge some decisions. There were times he didn't want to speak to certain people, but had to make a decision to sort of speak to those people. There were tough times, but his decisions, his response made him today to build a legacy that is blessed by God and is blessing many people. Church, this morning as we conclude, I want you to understand that you can be like Nehemiah. You can be like Joshua. You can be like Caleb. You can be like Joseph, who laid a platform for his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And because of that, they were interested to see who their granddad was. Today, you can do similar things. You can make people interested to know where VLCC is. You can make people interested in knowing what it's like to be guarded by God the Father. Your actions, your response to things can change the way people perceive Christianity and fatherhood as a whole. But we have to reclaim our positions in society. We need to stand up and walk with God, by God. You see, Nehemiah was occupying secular offices. He was a cupbearer in the royal in the king area, but he made decisions that influenced everyone around him. Today, let us make decisions that will make people to realize who God is, how loving it is, and how he can resolve the issues that we are facing today. I believe we as godly men should do our best to leave an excellent legacy to our children and the next generation of fathers. How great and wonderful would it be when we look at our young ones tomorrow, despite everything that's happening today, and say to them, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I'm now turning it over to you to keep going. How wonderful would that be? Despite everything that's happening today in our society. Will you agree with me when I say this is one of the most difficult periods to be a man, a father? Can you imagine what it's going to be like in the next decade or two. Our next generation needs to understand the essence and the significance of fatherhood